Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to episode 62 of the podcast. And today I'm going to share a new quilt story about one of my favorite goddess quilts, Torrent of Fear. And this quilt is about overcoming the fear in your quilts. It's about getting unstuck. If you've ever been so afraid to make a decision or so afraid to think about something or to work on something or even just pick the thread colors for your next quilt, it's about getting unstuck. And the reason why this quilt works for that is because it's basically a picture of what happens when you are stuck. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you and telling you more about the journey of making this quilt, as well as, kind of my perspective on it now, many, many years later. So it's been interesting to look back at it. I went back and read the old blog posts that I shared when I originally made this quilt in 2012. And I don't know, it was just a really nice moment of reflection. And it also made me, again, very grateful. That's going back to our previous quilt story about my Cuppernet Dover. Made me feel really, really grateful for how far I've come. And I think that's a really good thing. Check in on that every once in a while and just appreciate where we are right now. I think it's a good thing. I think it's looking back is, it can be a very, very positive thing. So what am I working on today? I have more freeform crochet in my hands. This is going to be the back of my jacket. And you can come and see a picture of this. You can find the show notes for this episode at leahday.com/fear. And I'll also share a lot of new photos for Torrent of Fear, the quilt, in that post as well. So come and check that out, leahday.com/fear. So this is going to be the back of my jacket. And I took this into a a yarn shop. I was buying some more yarn because I was afraid that I was about to run out. And so I went to the Charlotte Yarn shop, I think it's called. Excellent shop. I had such a great time there, and the staff is just so sweet and really, really nice, and everybody really loved it, so that made me feel good. I have never felt like I was as good at crochet or knitting as sewing or quilting. And I think a large reason for that is that with crochet and knitting, I never felt confident enough with those skills to become a designer. I was very much a pattern follower with those crafts. And this is what's interesting. This is the first time, this crochet project, I would say, is the first time that I'm ever working off of a pattern. Not using a pattern. I'm just making this up as I go along. I'm just picking out whatever pattern, whatever stitch, whatever chunky idea comes to mind and just going with it. And I'm just letting it flow. And then I'm using my dressmaker dummy, Lucy, to fit it and make sure it's all going to look good at the end. I'm kind of crossing my fingers on that because we're not even close to there yet. But yeah, it's been really good. And this has been the perfect thing to work on while I'm working on Mally the Maker. So Mally the Maker, quick update. I finished my edits. So this was the first round of editing that I did. So Josh has gotten a hold of it. I made those changes that he advised. Then I ran through the book now. I've listened to it all the way through. And as I'm listening, I'm crocheting and I'm also making changes to the galley, and I'm listening for issues and all that kind of stuff, and that's what I'm noting down. So I don't know, maybe it's just that need to have fiber in my hands or something like that, but it just really feels like freeform crochet was the perfect thing to be working on while I was editing. I find this really comforting too, so maybe that's part of it. I will return to my cross-stitch project. I have a cross-stitch project that I left unfinished. I will be returning to that, but I just can't do that and edit at the same time. That's more of something I can do when I'm watching mindless television. But it was really hard to have the frame on my lap and be trying to write in a book at the same time. So that had to go away for a little while. And yeah, I've been really enjoying this, and I feel so good about Mally the Maker. Did decide though that it was time to put it on a deadline, mostly because I can already tell there is a temptation, especially listening to the book, which is my favorite way to read fiction, there's a temptation to keep listening and editing and listening and editing and basically nitpicking it to death. And that is a path to crazy town, if ever there was one. That is a path to never publishing. And I think that's why there, you know, a lot of books never get seen, never get enjoyed, never get read, because of fear and the desire to make it perfect. So I've decided to set myself the deadline to get the book, you know, get the next round of edits done and hand it back to Josh by the end of June. And then unless there is something catastrophically wrong with it, I'm going to try not to change anything else. Because at that point, at some point, I'm going to have to say, this is good enough, and it's ready to go out, you know? So I'm hoping it will be done and done by the middle of the summer, maybe the end of the summer, but let's say we'll shoot for the middle of the summer right now. So that's been really exciting, and I have been continuing my adventures with watercolor painting, and I got a sample from Spoonflower. So this is Minky Fabric. It's honestly my favorite fabric right now. It's so luscious and soft, and you can see this gorgeous repeat. And what I love about it is, you know, I've been playing with Spoonflower for years. I've done all kinds of cheater cloth and stuff, but I've never managed to make anything look like dyed or painted fabric. I've never made it look, you know, like a color, but not really one solid color. And one solid color is okay. That's what I've done for years. But then there's just something about having more variety of color in there that just makes it look better. I can't really say it any better than that. But I love this. So this is just one example, and this is, quite frankly, I've not done very much gradation like this. This is my only piece that I did this way. And I have a whole bunch more samples coming. I just kind of got a lot of fat quarters just to test it all out. And then I put together a little cheater cloth. Honestly, for lack of a better word, I put together a little cheater cloth quilt for 4th of July that I really want to up my game as far as decorating for the different seasons and having quilts to pull out during certain special times of the year that are put away other times of the year. I just think that just really makes it special. You know, when you hit that time of the year, then it's like, oh, I can pull out the sunshine quilt, or oh, I can pull out the, you know, the 4th of July quilt, you know, and it just makes it special. So I have all of that coming. I can't wait to show it to you. I'm hoping that all of that will be up and ready by next week. So be looking forward to seeing that. And then another quilt, we've been working on Eternal Love. That is a goddess quilt-along, little mini quilt-along that we're working on through this month. And this week shared a tutorial on blanket stitching and zigzag stitching, basically finishing those raw edges of the quilt so that they're not gonna raw and go fraying, you know, weird on you. And, you know, while I was shooting the video, kind of my perfectionist tendencies came out, and, you know, I tried to talk through that and explain that the best I could. And, you know, and also explain there are many different ways to do this. I think the reason why applique is so challenging to teach from a teaching perspective is that there's just so many ways to do it. You can do fusible applique, you can do needle turn applique, you can do freezer or paper or fusible web applique, you can finish the edges with a zigzag, a satin stitch, a straight stitch, you know, a zigzag stitch. I mean, there's just so many things that you can do. The possibilities are limitless. Narrowing that down is the hardest part because, you know, there's some people that love raw edge, and then there's some people that hate raw edge with a passion. That's me. I mean, I don't hate it, but it's just raw edges kind of just make me itch all over. So, unless I'm in a really big hurry, then, you know, I'm forgiving of raw edges completely because I'm in such a big hurry. I don't want to finish those, all of those pieces, but for the most part, it's just not my favorite way to finish a quilt. So yeah, zigzag stitching and blanket stitching this week. And I did that stitching and had the quilt basted. So I had all 3 layers. And so I was basically doing that stitching plus quilting at the same time because it was going through all 3 layers of the quilt. And that worked great. It worked great because I used a really thin batting. I used Quilter's Dream Poly in the request thickness, so that worked out really, really well. And I gave some advice, if you wanted to use a thicker batting, I just think it would be better to do your blanket stitching on a quilt top versus the finished, the basted quilt. So, there's just so many different options. Like I said, it's just limitless possibilities. Makes it challenging to teach, but it makes it fun to do. So I hope that you are enjoying that and you'll come and check out that post. You can find it at leahday.com/blanketstitch. And let's see here, what else? Oh, we still have our pre-order going on for the 365 calendar. This is a little mini perpetual calendar. It's a little desktop calendar. It can set on your desk. And every day you can flip over and see a new free motion quilting designs. It's a little daily free motion quilting inspiration. And the nice thing is it's a perpetual calendar, so you can use it year after year after year. And we have a pre-order going on. So you get $1 off and I will sign all of the copies. So come and check that out at leahday.com/365calendar. And don't forget to put in the coupon code podcast to save 10% on your order. So hope that you'll come and check that out and pre-order a copy. We're going to be shipping those out on or around July 10th. So definitely coming soon. And a lot of people are buying one for themselves and one for a friend. It makes a really good gift. So that makes me feel good. I really did not consider it and think of that whenever we were planning this project with C&T Publishing, but that's how it's turned out, and that feels really, really good. So I hope you'll come and check that out too. Now, I did get back to walking foot quilting last week. I've been a little bit lax. I'm sorry about that. It's just been, Fridays have been kind of crazy, I'll be honest. But I got back to walking foot quilting last week and shared a design, Matrix Maze. And this is basically a zigzag grid. So we have grid lines, which is like a straight line grid, and then we have matrix, which is a curvy grid, and then now we have matrix maze, which is a zigzag grid. So all of these grids, you gotta look at kind of grid designs. It's each one of these is gonna do something a little bit different. If you want a very formal effect, you want everything to be very matchy-matchy and nice straight lines, then go with a typical grid lines design. If you want more flow, if you want that same grid texture but more flow and more movement, then matrix is going to be perfect. And the great thing is curves, probably more with free motion quilting than walking foot quilting, but curves are going to be a little bit faster to stitch with free motion quilting. They're going to be a little slower with your walking foot, but they're going to give you a really beautiful effect. And then the kind of furthest, strangest reach of the grid design would be Matrix Maze, where you get this strange zigzag and you really don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of angular shapes, but it's going to be different pretty much with every line of stitching that you do. So really a nice variety there. And you could take one quilt and break it up and do each, a different grid in different areas, and you're going to get something really funky. I think that would be a lot of fun to play with. So I hope you'll come and check out that design tutorial at leahday.com/matrixmaze. And, it's kind of funny. That was the 100th design tutorial that I shared back in the original 365 free motion quilting designs. That was one of the 100th design that I posted on the blog. And whenever I go back and do a tutorial on one of those older designs, I don't know, it just makes me a little nostalgic. That was a very special time. And I don't know, those designs have always remained, honestly, some of my favorites, and I have used them the most over and over again over the years. And so not only did I share the walking foot quilting tutorial, but I also relinked up and embedded the old free motion quilting tutorial, so you can see how to stitch it both ways at leahday.com/matrixmaze. So that's pretty much it for the updates around the house. I'm just having a blast with freeform crochet and Mally the Maker and watercolor painting. It's really been a fun summer so far, and I hope that you are having a wonderful time too. Don't forget to come and check out the 365 calendar and pre-order your copy at leahday.com/365calendar. And now here's the podcast all about Torrent of Fear and getting yourself unstuck in a very creative way. Hello, my quilting friends. Welcome to this quilt story about Torrent of Fear. This is a goddess quilt that I created back in 2012, and I want to tell you the story of what inspired it, then how it was constructed, and also give you a little fear challenge or exercise to hopefully work on and help you work through those times when fear really starts to affect your life and affect what you're able to do. So first off, I just want to say it is terrifying to share these quilt stories. And it's really scary. And 2 weeks ago, I shared a story about my cup runneth over. And these are going to tend to be very personal stories, what I was going through at the time. And, I've had the perspective of several years on some of these quilts, which has been really nice. But I can't emphasize the fact that, this is putting myself out there and it's scary, but that feels amazing because it's the opposite of this. So the inspiration for Torrent of Fear came in 2012, and it was at the very beginning of that year, and that's the year where everything shook up. So I'd started my blog in 2009, and the goal was 365 free motion quilting designs. Theoretically, that should have been all posted in 1 year, and it wasn't. I had to slow the project down and publish the designs more slowly because almost immediately I started getting requests to teach and write books, and at that time, suddenly we needed another source of income for our family to be able to pay the bills. So all of a sudden I needed to also not just share this fun blog on a daily basis, but I also needed to build a business very quickly. So I had to slow the blog down, and that psyched me out because it was like, oh my gosh, here I had this whole idea and I was going to quilt every day and share this whole thing. And then all of a sudden that didn't work out the way I expected. So it ended up taking 2.5 years to publish all of those designs. And I actually had them all stitched and I had them all designed and ready to go, but I just published them slowly over the course of those 2.5 years. So I had basically all of 2011, an entire year, 365 days to figure out what I was going to do next. What was going to be the next thing I was going to do? Was I going to do another challenge? What is I going to continue the designs? What am I going to blog about something completely different? It was a point of change. It was a point where I could stop. I could continue going. I could do anything I wanted to, basically. But it was a point that I needed to make a decision, and I was completely unable to do that. And there was a lot going on. I can say in 2011, I know I was drinking a lot. That was definitely a factor. And I think that can contribute to so much. It's just so easy to kind of let things slide and slip, and that was the time when, I started, kind of drinking a scotch on the rocks with everything. So it was like, oh, I'm watching a movie, let me go get a drink. And oh, I'm quilting a quilt, let me go get a drink. And oh, I'm writing this blog post, let me go get a drink. And it slipped in and became a habit. And I do think that affected my quilting. I do think that affected my creativity and was a contributing factor to that fear. Because if you're feeling anxious and worried and unable to think clearly, adding alcohol to that doesn't really help. I think it makes it considerably worse. It makes everything worse all the time. So I couldn't think straight. Every idea that I had, it was kind of like I would plan it and think about it for maybe a month, maybe a couple weeks, and then be like, oh, that's not good enough. And I'd scrap the idea and go back to the drawing board and, oh, I want to do this. And I was just bouncing all over the place. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do this. I know I wrote a book that year that was Free Motion Quilting from Feathers to Flames. I came out with another DVD that year. So I was busy, but I just wasn't being very efficient and certainly stuck. the big word that year was just completely stuck in place. And I think 2011 was probably the last year that I did not have a word to kind of guide me through that year, to really push me forward in a direction. I think it was 2012 that I was first heard of the whole word concept of having a word kind of be a guiding light or a guiding principle for the entire year. So I'm pretty sure that I didn't have a word for the year in 2011, and it just remained stuck the entire year. And it was maybe a week or two before the new year that I, could see the end coming. I mean, I was publishing Design 365. That last video was going up. I needed to figure out what was going to happen. Am I going to continue this? Am I going to blog about something else? I mean, all of this seems so silly now, because it's not 2011. I'm not on the eve of that, event. I have years now of experience in teaching and quilting and building a business and confidence and all the stuff that comes with that growth. But right then, it was terrifying. And I waited till the last minute. I was my own worst enemy. I waited till the very, very, very last minute. And then I said, okay, we're going to do a quilt-along. I'm going to share a different video every week. It's going to be lots of fun. And this is how we're going to do it. And that's how I got started with sharing quilt-alongs. And it was kind of like, as soon as I finally made that decision, I became unstuck. The second that I stopped treading water and made a choice to swim in a particular direction, everything got better. Everything made more sense. I could work without worrying. And I mean, when you leave things to the very, very last minute, you kind of don't really have a choice to sit there and fret about it. You kind of just have to go for it and get the work done and knock it out. So as 2012 got started, I think it was January, I started thinking about just how different I felt. I shared the first post. It was a great reaction. Quilters were enjoying it. I was getting a lot of comments. It was just a very positive energy. It felt great. And I started thinking about, wow, how much fear I had really let build up and take over my whole life. And then how light and open and free I felt once I finally made a decision and stopped letting the fear lock me in place. And that's when I started thinking about fear and decided I need to design a quilt on this. So I started drawing, and this was the first quilt that I can really say, well, no, it probably wasn't the first quilt that was really about something negative, but it was the first quilt that I really wanted to construct quickly. And I kept expecting there to be kind of a positive element in the quilt, like a sunshine or a rainbow or a pink happy umbrella or something like that. But as I kept drawing the design, I realized, no, this really needs to just showcase fear. It needs to showcase what happens when you let yourself be completely locked in place. And so she is, let me just describe the quilt really quickly. There's a black background all the way around it, gray storm clouds that are nice circular storm clouds that are kind of stacked on top of one another, appliqued on top of one another, and they're decorated with thickly couched threads in gray and black. And then there is a second gray border that surrounds strips of blue fabric, and that is all around the goddess, which is made of very dark batik fabrics. I think her body is mostly black and then like a very, very dark gray. And then I also couched more threads over her hair. And her form is very, how can I say it? You don't even know she's a woman. You don't even know, other than long hair, you can't really even tell. She has no form. She's hunched over. Her hair's in her face. She has no face for all intents and purposes. She is formless. She's not pretty. You don't know who she is. You don't know what she is. And that's what fear does to us. And so I started drawing this. And like I said, I kept it kind of trying to fit in something positive, and it never worked. Eventually I realized, you know what, this is actually exactly what it needs to be. It needs to just showcase fear and what it can do when allowed to run unchecked. When allowed to run amok, we have no shape, we have no creativity, we have no beauty, we have no ability to share beautiful things because we're so afraid of doing anything. I can say that fear of what people think has been something that I have struggled with for most of my life. That constant worry, what will people think? What will people think? What will people think? It's like a little engine in my head and drives me nuts. And I can remember, and I will be honest, I think the meanest, most horrible thing that you can say to someone is, are you really going to wear that? I know, it sounds so silly, but I do believe that my obsession about what other people thought of me started with that simple question. And it would usually be my sisters, who I absolutely love, but they weren't the best role models for self-esteem because, you know, no matter what I was wearing, to get hit with that question, are you really going to wear that? Are you really going to wear that? Is that what you're wearing today? You know, it causes instantaneous questioning. Well, yeah, I was going to wear jeans and a t-shirt. I thought that was the right thing to wear, but, you know, I guess it's not. I mean, it fills you with this uncertainty. Like, what did I do? What did I do wrong? What is wrong with this? This is what I'm comfortable in, you know? And then the engine of fear starts. And it's, oh, I wore something wrong. What will people think of me? You know, what will they think if I wear just jeans and a t-shirt to this nice event? I need to go put on a dress. But then if I put on that dress, what if I'm too dressy? What if I stand out too much? What will people think then? What if they think I'm just show off? What would they think if I am, you know, standing out of the crowd and everyone can see me and it's just so embarrassing? And it just goes and goes and goes. And eventually you don't even end up going to the freaking event because the fear of what everyone else is thinking of you, which you cannot control, by the way, is so overwhelming. And that little question, are you really going to wear that? Has been the thing to just kind of start the whole ball rolling. And I can say this has definitely been something that has come up for me with my business even. If I share these personal stories, if I share that I'm not perfect, if I say out loud that I had to stop drinking because it became a problem, what will people think of me? What will they think if I'm honest? What will they think if I share the truth and I say that out loud? That's scary. But it's also exhilarating. So, as you can probably tell, these posts bring up a lot of emotion for me. And it's scary to go there in public, essentially. It's scary to bring up that level of emotion also for fear of, you know, again, what will people think? But it's also exhilarating because this is the truth, you know? And I think that we need to share our truth more often and to be more open and public and let go of that fear of what people will think, that fear of being judged. Because ultimately, we really can't control what other people think. That took me years to realize. It took me years of being uncomfortable and unhappy and obsessing about what was going on in other people's minds that I could not control at all before I finally realized it doesn't matter what they think. It matters what I think. And I know that I need to tell these stories. That I've been waiting to tell these stories and feeling unsatisfied for years because I haven't been telling these stories. And that's the hilarious thing about it. Every single year practically, I've written in my journal, I want to share more goddess quilts. I want to share the goddess quilts in different ways. I want to write that book. And every single year goes by and I don't do it And, you know, there's the fear that was holding back, but then there's also just that inertia that can, I think, so easily happen. Well, I didn't share it last year. Well, I don't have enough time, you know, and it's figuring out how to combat all of the excuses to make it happen. There was a book that I read recently, The Crossroads of Should and Must. I believe that's the name of the book. I'll make sure to link it up in the show notes so you can find it. But, you know, it's doing the things that you feel like you should do. You know, I should get that blog post up. I should take those photos. I should quilt that quilt. And then doing the things that you must do. I must share these goddess quilts. I must tell these stories. I must be honest and share in a way that is unusual and different, but is me. I must be myself, because I can't be, you know, I can't try and be something I'm not, basically. So yeah, I highly recommend that book. I think it's really, really good. It's a very simple book. It's very pretty. So I recommend getting like the hardcover edition, because it's an art book basically. And I think it's very, very helpful for understanding that crossroads and that decision-making process where we pick continually what we should be doing. Because, you know, hey, we all need to pay our bills, right? And certainly that is priority. But then when the bills are paid and things are okay and you have the ability, we should also be pursuing the things that we must do with our lives. One of my best friends recently has been very, very sick, and not to share any personal details of her life, but basically this was a very long-term thing that had been brewing and gone undetected for a very long time. And more than anything else, it's just made me more and more aware that we need to be living the life that we want to live right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, but right now. And deal with the fear and deal with the what will people think and deal with the crazy fallout that might come from that. But if we're not living the life that we want to live, you know, it might be a lot shorter than you think. We might not have as much time as we're banking on to get everything we want done. And the only way to know for sure, because we don't know, we have no idea how long we're going to be on this earth and blessed with this amazing life that we have. But the only way to really be able to, like, I guess, get an insurance policy on your life. The only way to have an insurance policy that you've actually accomplished the things that you want to do with your life is to start doing them right now. Because waiting and waiting and waiting just puts it off for another day. And that other day, you might find that you have horrible cancer and you don't get that chance to do those things that you wanted to do. And you don't have time now to finish those quilts or to write that book, or to be able to do those things that will really fill your life with meaning. So I think fear is a good thing to make a quilt about. It's a good thing to sit with it and understand it and wrap your brain around it. Another really good book that I think you should read is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. In that book, she talks about how fear and creativity are your road trip companions to making anything. And I completely agree with that. And I really like that metaphor. I like that visual image that it puts in my head. We're all in the car together, fear's in the back seat, you know, creativity's here at my side, and we're all driving down the road together and we're going to make something really awesome. But we've all got to be in it together. Fear's got to be there, you know? It's going to be there. Whenever we're doing something creative, whenever we're doing something different, whenever we're just doing what we want to do, fear's going to be right along for the ride. And you can't kill it and can't get rid of it. Because usually when you kill fear, you also kill the creativity too. So I really like that book. I highly recommend it if you're wanting to really push and pull more creativity into your life and make more things and give yourself permission to make more things. And I think that can be very, very helpful. So now let's talk about the construction process on Torrent of Fear, because this was a quilt that really marked a turning point in my goddess quilts. I started actually wanting them to be pieced much quicker, to put the top together and not spend months and months and months on the process, to get it together in a matter of days. And that was really radical. I gotta say, at the very beginning, my goddess quilts were show quilts. And I had that mentality with all of these, that they needed to be perfect. They needed to be show quality. They had to be densely quilted. They had to have over-the-top techniques, and they needed to be big. And Torrent of Fear was one of the first that really challenged all of those ideas. I'm not going to quilt it densely. I'm going to put this thing together as fast as I possibly can. I'm going to keep it fairly small because I don't have a lot of time to make something big. And I'm going to try some funky, fun, weird techniques that a show judge probably would raise her eyebrow at. So I was kind of challenging my fears of how I was used to making quilts as I was constructing this. So first designed it, drew it, same method as I did for my Cup Runneth Over and a lot of my quilts at that time. I drew a small image, then scanned it, put it into the computer, blew it up to a finished size that I liked. And this is a relatively large wall hanging. I'd say it's just a little bit bigger than kind of a medium-sized wall hanging. It's probably about, it's pushing 4 feet long by about 2.5 to 3 feet wide. So I constructed the top in 3 days using No Sewing Until You Quilt It, one of my favorite techniques taught by my friend Ann Holmes. And that's a technique where you use freezer paper, you turn the edges under, and you layer everything on top of French fuse, which is a very lightweight tri-cot fusible interfacing. And then so you fuse it down, and you don't take a single stitch. You then layer the quilt with batting and backing, and then you begin stitching and quilting at the same time as you secure down all of those turned under edges. So that's how I constructed the quilt top. And what I love about No Sewing Until You Quilt It is that you get this wonderful reveal where you're peeling off all of the pieces of paper one by one. And I shot photos at the time to capture that, and I shared it in another video. So I'll make sure to put that in the Torrent of Fear page as well, so that way you can see that video that I shared back in 2012 whenever I originally made this quilt. So what happened next? I wanted to try something new. I really wanted to challenge myself to experiment with different techniques. I wanted to add more texture. I was craving texture for this quilt. So that's when I learned how to spin. So spinning wool is something I'd done a little bit in high school, but really not much at all. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I couldn't really control my effects. I had an idea in my head of what I wanted, but I couldn't really seem to make it. So with Torrent of Fear, this quilt, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted. I wanted gray wool and black wool spun together and plied together, and I wanted it to be very thick and chunky, but I wanted it to change. So sometimes it would go chunky and then it would go thin. I just really wanted it to be a very strong texture on the surface of the quilt. And I'd say this is the amazing joy of the internet, now versus when I was in high school, just, 17 years ago, that I was able to find so much information on art yarns and spinning, so much more information on how to get started and how to use a hand spindle. This was before I had an electric spinning wheel. So I just started experimenting and playing and bought roving and dyed it, gray and black, and bought some bamboo, I guess it would be bamboo fleece, or roving, and started spinning that and just kept playing until I created the yarn that I wanted. And that is so wonderful to be able to not just make the quilt, but also make the accessories and the embellishments that's going on it. That adds a whole different dimension to your quilts. It's just a lot of fun, and it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. But I have to admit, thick, chunky yarns do create a little bit of a problem once they get on a quilt. So part of the learning process of putting the yarns on the quilt is what part of the quilting process they go on. And I put these on, I think, a little bit too soon. So I think I attached them and couched them on, and it was like a really big zigzag stitch with my walking foot. And I think it was right at the beginning of the quilting process. And then that caused lots of problems because it's thick, chunky yarn. What's going to catch on that is my open toe darning foot for free motion quilting. And this was before I really had any interest in walking foot quilting. In fact, actually, I think I was a little snobby about walking foot quilting at this time. Reading back through my original posts on this quilt, I could pick up a little bit on that. So it was really funny to see how much has changed over the years. So I would say quilt the quilt first and get everything stitched and, you know, to the density that you want. And then as the last step, couch the yarns on. And that's hard for me because when I'm adding something really blingy and decorative and, you know, just texture yummy, I want that to go on so I can see it. You know, it's hard to wait until the very, very end of the quilting process to go stick that nice decorative stuff on. But I know that I did her hair right. So I did go on ahead and do all of the free motion quilting in her hair. And then as the last step, did the free motion couching, or you know, I do believe it was free motion couching that I did using a zigzag stitch with my darning foot and to place the yarns on her hair and stitch them down all at the same time. There's all kinds of crazy funky things that you can do with yarn and fabric and decorative stitching. You know, I've really barely scratched the surface on all of this. It's hard to experiment on a real quilt on something big. So it's one of those things I've always wanted to do a little, you know, maybe just a little series on art quilts, the small art quilts, and just do a lot of experiments. But it's also hard to know how much time and effort and energy a project will actually take when you take something small and blow it up on something big. So, I mean, there's lots of different upsides and downsides. And I can say you can do a free motion couching even easier these days because there are actually feet specifically designed for that now too. So lots of different fun things to play with if that's something that interests you. So overall, I think this quilt maybe took about a month to construct, and I was much happier with how it finished up in the end. I had completed 2 quilts before this. The 2 goddess quilts that came before this were Emergence and Hot Cast. And both of those had issues that were largely caused by fear, by, you know, what will people think? You know, I made decisions in construction that made those quilts more complicated and difficult and challenging and ultimately unsatisfying because I was too afraid of changing my methods and trying a different style of quilting. And I was still so attached to the idea of competing and making a show quality perfect quilt, you know, that I was just still stuck. And Torrent of Fear really got me out of that. You know, I made this quilt and I finished it and said, I'm really happy with that. I love it. It makes me happy, even though it's a dark, ominous quilt with, you know, big heavy rain clouds and it's about fear and, you know, she's not the prettiest goddess in the world. I love that quilt because it so perfectly illustrated what I wanted to show. It took the idea in my head, that image in my head, and got it on fabric nearly as close to what I wanted as possible. And that felt really good too. So I think the lesson on construction was really to just allow yourself to do what you want to do and make your quilts the way you want to make it, and stop letting things like, oh my gosh, it has raw edges, or oh my gosh, it's going to be chunky yarn, or oh my gosh, it's not quilted as densely as all my other quilts are quilted. You know, let go of those fears and allow yourself to make the quilt that you really want to make in the time and energy that you have to stitch it. Again, we don't know how much time we've got on this earth, And I don't know about you, but I really am done spending the time that I have densely stitching the same filler design over and over and over again. And yeah, life's too short for that. Make the designs bigger, get the quilt done, enjoy it on your wall, share the story of it with your friends. So that is it for this story. I hope that you enjoyed learning more about Torrent fear and how fear is an ever-present part of our lives. It is what's kept us alive, I think, as cavemen and women, and then now as human beings. You know, fear has a place. It certainly does. And it has a place in our creativity, in our creative journey, but you can't let it stitch you in place. You can't let it stop you from doing what you really want to do. So here's the little challenge or practice or exercise if you want to try working on your fear. Think of the thing that is terrifying you the most. You know, whether it's somebody's reaction, maybe if you want to do something and you're afraid of how people will react, you're afraid of sharing something and you're afraid of the negative comments, you're afraid of saying something, you know, and what reprisals might come from that. And I want you to think about that fear and actually dwell on it. I want you to write the comment or write the words that you expect somebody to say or write the whole scenario down of what will go down if you share what's in your heart, if you share what you want to share. Write the whole messy, ugly story. The absolute worst things that you can possibly imagine. You know, I expect, you know, these people to attack me and say horrible things to me and send me this email that's full of curse words and yelling at me and telling me I'm a drunk and I'm stupid and ugly and I'm horrible and I'm so self-centered for sharing this podcast. And who cares about your life, Leah? You know, like, write it all down. Those are the fears that kind of come up in my head, by the way. You know, write it all down and write it down as ridiculously as you expect. Your absolute worst fears. When I do this, sometimes it does make me cry because it's like, that's what I'm afraid of. This is so scary to face this. So I write it all down. Sometimes I'll type it, sometimes I'll write it by hand. A lot of times I'll do this when I'm fearing negative reviews. So let's say I'm about to release a book or a workshop or something like that, and I'm terrified of what people will say about it, then I'll write down every negative review I can possibly think of. What is the most horrible thing somebody could say about my work? What is the most horrible thing somebody could say about me? And I write it all down. And it might take a day or two, usually, maybe a week or two, maybe a month or two. Sometimes it takes me a month or two to be able to open that back up again and read it and laugh. I'm not kidding. It will make you laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it. I have reviews that I've written for things like the book, you know, Explore Walking Foot Quilting with Leah Day that I wrote last year. I wrote some nasty reviews for myself, and then I opened it up after the book launched, you know, after everybody had gotten it and were telling me that it was wonderful and they loved it, and I read those reviews and it was laughable. You know, no one would say something so horrible to you, number one. And if they did, I find that my reaction when I do actually encounter negativity is so very different from what I think my reaction is. So I fear this attack and I fear these negative comments, and then I'm so terrified of what will people think? What will people think? But then when it actually happens and someone's mean to me, which does happen, my actual real life reaction is very simple. I'm sorry, here's a refund. It's not emotional at all. I find there's nothing to get upset about. You didn't like it? That's okay. I'm so sorry. Go find another tutorial. You didn't like what I said? Don't listen to the podcast. I mean, it's kind of, you know, we make this big, huge deal about making everyone happy and being so afraid of what they think. But when it comes down to actually confronting that angry person, you might find that it's not actually so scary. It's actually very simple and not emotional at all. I'm sorry you didn't like it. It wasn't for you. Move on. Find something that you do like. Go enjoy something that you do like and try and have a more positive outlook. You know, I think that practice is very good. It's something that I started doing a few years ago when fears started creeping in and really holding me back, especially on the things that I was, like workshops and stuff that I wanted to share. I was really feeling just locked in place on a lot of fears, and writing that for myself, facing my worst fears, writing it all down and getting it all out of my head. So I had the freedom to go and do my work that I needed to get done. That was liberating. It really, really was. So I hope that you'll try that fear practice if something has been holding you back. I hope that you enjoyed hearing this story about Torrent of Fear, and that you will come and check out more podcast episodes at leahday.com/podcast. I am so very thankful that you're joining me for these stories, and I hope that you are enjoying them and will share them with your friends. Until next time, let's go quilt.